The last echoes of the clock's midnight chime faded into an eerie silence as Celeste stood before the imposing iron gates of Madame Tussaud's wax museum. The foggy London night seemed to press against her, urging her forward into the awaiting darkness. She fumbled with the ancient key, a family heirloom passed down through generations of night watchmen. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to reverberate through the empty streets. Celeste hesitated, her breath visible in the chilly air before stepping into the shadowy courtyard. The gates creaked shut behind her, the sound final and somehow ominous. As Celeste made her way towards the museum's entrance, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The looming building before her seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, its windows like hollow eyes staring down at her. She had grown up hearing stories about this place, tales of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena that her grandfather, the previous night watchman, used to whisper to her on stormy nights. But those were just stories, weren't they? Celeste steeled herself, determined to prove that she was worthy of carrying on the family tradition. The heavy wooden doors groaned as Celeste pushed them open, revealing the cavernous main hall. The air inside was thick and stale, carrying the faint scent of melted wax and something else, something older and more sinister. As she flicked on her flashlight, the beam cut through the darkness, illuminating row upon row of lifelike figures. Kings and queens, murderers and saints, all frozen in eternal poses, their glassy eyes seeming to follow her every move. Celeste's footsteps echoed on the marble floor as she began her rounds, unaware that this night would be unlike any other. In the dim light, Celeste noticed something odd about the exhibits. The wax figures seemed more detailed, more alive than she remembered from her daytime visits. A bead of sweat rolled down her spine as she realized that some of the statues appeared to be in slightly different positions than they should be. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. It was just her imagination playing tricks on her, surely. As she moved deeper into the museum, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen and writhe at the edges of her vision. Suddenly, a noise from the far end of the hall made Celeste jump. It sounded like whispers, barely audible, but unmistakably there. Her heart pounding, she swung her flashlight in that direction, illuminating the figure of a man she didn't recognize. He stood with his back to her, his clothes out of place and time. "Excuse me," Celeste called out, her voice trembling slightly. "The museum is closed. You shouldn't be here." The figure slowly turned and Celeste's blood ran cold. It wasn't a man at all, but a wax figure. And yet its eyes gleamed with an intelligence that no lifeless statue should possess. As it took a step towards her, Celeste realized with mounting horror that her night was about to become a waking nightmare. Celeste's heart raced as she backed away from the approaching figure, her mind reeling with disbelief. The waxman's movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings, yet undeniably real. As she retreated, other figures in the hall began to stir, their waxy limbs creaking and cracking as they came to life. The air filled with a cacophony of whispers, 1,000 voices speaking at once in languages long dead. Celeste's back hit a wall, and she realized with growing panic that she was surrounded. Just as the first waxen hand reached for her, a voice cut through the din. "This way, quickly!" Celeste whirled to see a man beckoning frantically from a hidden door behind a tapestry. Without hesitation, she darted towards him, narrowly escaping the grasping fingers of the animated figures. The man, who introduced himself as Edgar, pulled her into a narrow passageway and slammed the door shut. "We don't have much time," he panted, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and excitement. "They'll find us soon if we don't keep moving." As they hurried through the labyrinthine corridors behind the museum walls, Edgar explained in hushed tones that he was a former curator who had discovered the museum's dark secret. "This place, it's not what it seems," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "The figures, they're not just wax. They're vessels, housing the souls of the damned." Celeste listened in horrified fascination as Edgar recounted tales of ancient curses, deals with otherworldly entities and the true purpose of the museum, a prison for souls trapped between worlds. Their respite was short-lived. As they emerged into a storage room filled with half-finished wax creations, a new horror awaited them. Tabitha, another night watchman Celeste had met during her training, stood before them. But her eyes were glassy, her skin taking on the sheen of wax. "Help me," Tabitha pleaded, her voice distorted and inhuman. "I can feel myself slipping away." Edgar pulled Celeste back as Tabitha lunged forward, her fingers elongating into grotesque, waxy tendrils. Dodging between crates and unfinished statues, Celeste and Edgar fled deeper into the bowels of the museum. The walls seemed to pulse around them, and faces began to emerge from the plaster, moaning in agony. "We need to find the source," Edgar gasped as they ran. "The artifact that binds the souls to this place. It's our only hope of ending this nightmare." As they descended a spiral staircase into the museum's foundations, the air grew thick with the scent of brimstone and melting wax. Celeste realized with growing dread that they were no longer in any part of the museum she recognized. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp around them, and she began to question whether they were still in London at all, or if they had crossed into some hellish otherworld where the laws of nature no longer applied. The staircase seemed to descend endlessly, spiraling into an impossible abyss. Celeste and Edgar stumbled forward, their surroundings shifting between glimpses of the museum's foundations and visions of otherworldly landscapes. The air grew thick and sulphurous, making each breath a struggle. Finally, they emerged into a vast chamber that defied logic. Its dimensions seemed to fluctuate, and gravity itself felt uncertain. At the center stood an enormous, pulsating mass of wax, faces and limbs constantly forming and melting away on its surface. "The nucleus," Edgar breathed, his voice filled with awe and terror. "The source of it all." As they approached, Celeste felt a pull on her very being, as if the waxen abomination was trying to draw her essence into itself. The whispers that had pursued them throughout the museum crescendoed into a deafening roar. Celeste clutched her head, overwhelmed by the cacophony of trapped souls begging for release. Through the din, she heard Edgar shouting something about a ritual, a way to end the curse, but his words were lost in the chaos. Suddenly, figures began to emerge from the nucleus, not the wax replicas from above, but shadowy, half-formed entities that moved with unnatural speed. Among them, Celeste recognized the distorted forms of Tabitha and other missing persons she'd seen on posters around London. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They weren't just fighting for their lives, but for the souls of countless victims trapped in this purgatorial nightmare. As the shadows closed in, Edgar thrust an ancient-looking dagger into Celeste's hands. "The artifact!" he yelled over the din. "You must destroy it. It's the only way." Time seemed to slow as Celeste fought her way towards the nucleus. The shadowy figures clawed at her, each touch sending jolts of icy pain through her body. She saw Edgar being overwhelmed, his form beginning to melt and merge with the encroaching wax. With a surge of desperate strength, Celeste lunged forward, plunging the dagger into the heart of the pulsating mass. An inhuman shriek tore through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of reality. The nucleus began to collapse in on itself, dragging everything in the room towards its imploding core. Celeste felt herself being pulled in, her body growing lighter as the boundary between flesh and wax, reality and nightmare, began to blur. In that moment of transformation, suspended between worlds, she experienced flashes of countless lives and deaths, centuries of souls trapped in endless cycles of torment. The chamber dissolved around her, replaced by a whirling vortex of memories and identities. As Celeste's consciousness began to fragment, she clung to the hope that her sacrifice would finally bring an end to the eternal exhibition of the damned. With a final, reality-shattering implosion, everything went dark. Consciousness returned to Celeste in waves, each one bringing with it fragments of memory and sensation. She found herself lying on the cold, hard floor of the museum's main hall, the first light of dawn seeping through the windows. As her vision cleared, She saw that the wax figures stood motionless in their original positions, no sign of the night's horrors visible on their placid faces. Celeste's body ached, and her mind reeled with the weight of her experiences. Had it all been a nightmare? But the remnants of melted wax on her clothes and the ancient dagger clutched in her hand told a different story. As Celeste staggered to her feet, she noticed subtle changes in the museum. The air felt lighter, cleaner somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from the building itself. The faces of the wax figures, once eerily lifelike, now seemed softer, more artificial, mere representations rather than prisons. She made her way through the halls, searching for any sign of Edgar or Tabitha, but found no trace of either. The hidden passages and the nightmare realm below seemed to have vanished, leaving only ordinary walls and floors in their wake. Outside, London was awakening to a new day, oblivious to the battle that had been fought in the realm between worlds. Celeste stumbled onto the street, blinking in the pale sunlight. Passers-by gave her curious looks, but no one seemed to notice anything amiss at the museum. As she walked, trying to gather her thoughts, Celeste began to notice small, inexplicable changes in the city around her. Storefronts she didn't recognize, subtle differences in fashion and technology. Tiny details that suggested the world had moved on while she had been trapped in that timeless, purgatorial space. Over the following days, Celeste tried to piece together what had happened. News reports mentioned a gas leak at the museum, with several employees, including a curator and a night watchman, listed as missing. No one seemed to remember Edgar or Tabitha, and Celeste's inquiries were met with blank stares or vague dismissals. She visited libraries and archives, searching for information about the museum's history and the artifact she had destroyed, but found only fragmented legends and myths, nothing concrete to validate her experiences. As weeks passed, Celeste found herself drawn back to the museum, now reopened after renovations. She walked its halls as a visitor, searching for any hint of the otherworldly realm she had glimpsed. The exhibits remained unchanged, yet Celeste could swear she sometimes caught fleeting expressions on the wax faces, not of anguish or malevolence, but of peace. In quiet moments, she thought she could hear faint whispers of gratitude on the edge of hearing. Celeste began to understand that while she had ended the curse, the echoes of that other world would always be a part of her. She had become a bridge between realms, forever changed by her encounter with the Waxen Whispers of the damned. Months passed, and Celeste found herself unable to fully rejoin the world she once knew. Her experiences in the museum had left an indelible mark on her soul, separating her from the oblivious masses that walked London streets. She took to wandering the city at night, drawn to places that echoed with history and hidden truths. It was during one of these nocturnal explorations that Celeste stumbled upon a hidden doorway in an ancient churchyard, its archway inscribed with symbols reminiscent of those she had seen in the museum's secret chambers. With a sense of both dread and inevitability, Celeste stepped through the doorway. The world shifted around her, colors bleeding away, until she found herself in a grey, misty realm that seemed to exist between moments. Shadowy figures moved in the distance, some familiar, others strange and otherworldly. As she ventured deeper into this liminal space, understanding dawned on Celeste with a clarity that was both terrifying and oddly comforting. The museum had never been just a building in London. It was a nexus, a crossing point between the world of the living and this purgatorial plane. In this realm, Celeste encountered Edgar and Tabitha, their forms ethereal yet recognizable. They explained that the curse she had broken had not just freed the souls trapped in the museum, but had unraveled a greater cosmic tapestry. This purgatory-like realm had always existed, a way station for souls transitioning between states of being. The museum's curse had corrupted this natural process, trapping souls in waxen prisons. By destroying the artifact, Celeste had not only freed the trapped souls, but had become a gatekeeper, a bridge between worlds. As Celeste grappled with this revelation, she began to understand her new role. She was neither fully alive nor dead, but existed in a state of in-between. able to traverse the boundaries that separated realms. The whispers she had heard in the waking world were the voices of souls seeking guidance, and she now had the power to help them find their way. Edgar and Tabitha had chosen to remain in this realm, serving as guardians and guides for the newly arrived souls, and they offered Celeste a place among them. In the end, Celeste accepted her newfound purpose with a mixture of solemnity and wonder. She realized that her night in the museum had been more than just a harrowing ordeal. It had been an initiation into a greater mystery. As she took her place alongside Edgar and Tabitha, Celeste felt a profound sense of belonging. The world she had known faded into memory, replaced by the vast, intricate workings of the afterlife. And though the realm of the living now seemed distant, Celeste knew she would forever watch over it, a silent guardian helping lost souls navigate the waxen whispers of eternity.